Hi everybody, welcome to our very first group critique. We'll be having these types of reviews after every assignment deadline, and that's typically when I like to post these reviews is the day after an assignment is due. So you can unless something happens like I'm sick or some very unexpected thing happens, generally that's when you can expect that I'll be providing feedback on your work. And there's a way to set up notifications in the classroom. You can subscribe to the threads. There's different methods if you don't want to be checking in all the time to the thread, to see when I post feedback. So you might want to look into that a little further. Um, and let's see, actually, hold on just a sec. So here we are in the classroom, and yeah, you can just go here to your profile and click on notifications to set that up. And then I think in the learning path, in the actual discussion area, hold on, let's go to that. So here's a post, a potential post that's empty at this point. But when you post your assignment, you can also subscribe to the thread right here. So so to be honest, I don't actually subscribe to threads, or I don't have notifications on because I'm in the classroom a lot. So I just rely on coming in and seeing what's new. But it can be really useful if you don't want to be checking all the time on your end. Okay, anyhow, that's really all I wanted to say there. So yeah, so I'll be providing feedback on your assignments in the thread, and then you can use that feedback for the final submission, the submission at the end of the week. And I know some of you have taken a lot of classes before and you're familiar with that, but if you're new, that's really how it works. Is we have tasks, which is the draft phase, and then you take the draft, you use feedback from myself or other students or yourself, and you revise, and then by the end of the week, that's when you submit your final revised assignments, your tasks, in the submission area. And there's also a small written component in the submissions area. Sometimes, when the deadlines, sometimes just appear out of the blue and you're like, oh, I have to get something done. And maybe you don't have quite enough time, you think, to get your task really fine-tuned the way you like it, you want it to be in this task level. I'd really encourage you, though, just, even if you have it slightly incomplete, submit it anyhow, because that way you can be part of this live group critique. It's not quite live. I mean, I'm live, but you're listening to it later. What I mean is like the video tutorial, the video critique. So you can be part of that, and that's very useful. So, okay, all right. Okay, this particular assignment I think is really setting the foundation for the class in general. And throughout this class, what I'll try to do is mention things that I think are going to be really super useful for you to remember coming out of this class, because we have a lot of information, and I kind of feel like not everything is like things you really have to know. Some of it, it's interesting in terms of color theory, but maybe not the most practical advice that you really should know. But some things I think are really going to be very useful, and this particular assignment, I think the terms we're learning and all of the different aspects of it are really good to know, and will make you sound like you know what you're talking about in terms of any type of color application in any field you're wanting to go into. And those terms are the three properties of color. So we've got hue meaning just the actual color itself, purple, pink, green, red, that is hue. And then the next property of color, again, there's three. The first is hue. The second is value, and that simply refers to the lightness or the darkness of a color. Okay, value. So when you think of value, just replace that with lightness or darkness. And so any color can have any type of value. So it can be really light, it can be mid value, it can be dark, it can be just anything in between. So the last one, and I think this is the one that we tend to not know so much going when we go into color theory. We may sort of know what it looks like, but we may not know what it's called, which is saturation. And saturation really just refers to how intense a color is. And I like to think of it like if you have like a big bucket of paint, how much of that actual pure pigment is in that paint? You know, is there a lot so it seems super bright and intense? Like I also think saturated colors can appear sort of slightly more like neon because they're so pure. And desaturated colors, so that's saturated, you know, of saturated color. Desaturated color is when there is a lot less of the color in the paint that you have, the color that you have, the swatch, whatever that is. And so it tends to look more grayed out, you know. So muted or grayed out colors, you know, are desaturated colors. Okay. And they tend not, they're just not that vibrant. You know, they're more muted and sort of subtle colors. Okay. Um, we'll talk more about them as we go through, but that's, oh, and tints, tones, and shades. So those are the other terms that we're learning. A lot of times people in the, you know, people who haven't studied color theory, or even people who have, they tend to use tints, tones, and shades interchangeably. You know, where they'll say that color, that tint over there is green, and they may be using that term incorrectly. Maybe what they're actually wanting to refer to is a tone. So we'll talk more about what tints, tones, and shades are. You guys already probably know that already because you've done this assignment. But those are three terms that I think it's valuable to know what those actually are so you can sound a little bit more well-informed, tints, tones, and shades. Because a lot of times they can be quite similar, and it's good to be able to use them, again, use them correctly. Okay, let's get started. Fiona, so you have chosen purple as your color. And yeah, so in this assignment, what you're doing is you're just really exploring these properties of color using the various scales. And so in tints, the key with tints is that all you're adding is white. So I'm in Photoshop now, and I will probably mostly be using Photoshop to look at assignments just for no other reason than I tend to have, I teach a lot of I teach a lot of Photoshop, so I'm in Photoshop a lot. But what I'll be doing in our reviews is I'm going to be using the color picker a lot, which is right in here. And that's the same for Illustrator too, you know, the color picker. So it's pretty much, in terms of reviewing work, it's pretty much the same between Photoshop and Illustrator. Yeah, just to let you know. Okay, so the first thing you're doing is taking a color, any color really, or any hue I should say to be more correct, and you're using the most saturated color of that hue. And I'm going to click on this just to sample it and open up the color picker. And how do we know something is the most saturated? Well, we can look at it, but we can also look at it in the color picker, and we see here that if it's in the upper right hand corner, it's the most saturated color um, of that hue. Now, something to keep in mind is that all of the different hues actually have different values in terms of their saturation. And what I mean by that is if we look at the purple, even at its most saturated, it's still a fairly, what we would consider still a darker value, you know, compared to if we look at some other colors like, let's go over here to yellow. Okay, so here's yellow at maximum saturation. Can you see how much lighter that is? So it tends to be that the warmer colors are lighter and the darker colors are cooler when at maximum saturation, depending. We get a little, as we go towards the warmer colors, it gets lighter. Why is that important? It's just sort of interesting to note that darker colors, or pardon me, that cooler colors tend to have, even at some maximum saturation, tend to look darker. Okay, so let's get back in here and look. So with tints, what you're doing is you're just simply walking across the top here to create your gradient, the top of this, the color picker. And we're going across the top because we don't want to add any gray or black to it. And if we go below this level, then we start to add in black or a mixture of white and black. So we just, for tints, we just stick to the top row. So for this one, what I would say is that you want to just make sure that each of these steps is even. So it looks like these two steps are the same. So what you want to do is make sure that you go over, that you kind of pick a color over to the side, okay, as you go through, so that each of them are even. And it looks pretty even in here as we go through and all the way to the end. When you get here, it looks like what you want to do is make sure that this last swatch also changes to your hue, to this purple hue. Okay, so you want to make sure to have that included in there. Make it, just here's this color, this swatch right here, and so as you go over, maybe just a little bit over there, and then you get something that looks like a white, but a white based on your particular hue. That's what's really interesting also about this exercise, which I think is just really, fascinating, is that, if you go to the paint store and you're picking out a white, if you've ever done that before, you will notice that when you see all those swatches together, like there may be like dozens of different whites that you can choose from, no white is the same. Suddenly, if you compare two whites, one you'll notice, hey, that looks kind of bluish, like a bluish white. One of them maybe looks like an orangish white. You can really see them. They have undertones. So in theory, we actually have white and black, but in reality, I personally think that there is really only very light tints that we perceive as white and very dark shades that we perceive as black. Does that make sense? So white is just sort of a term we use for anything that kind of looks really, really, really light, but it is actually, in fact, a tint. Okay, so that's what I'd like you to work on for that one. This one, this looks pretty good. Now notice with this one here, so we're going down, again, we're going, oops, we're going down instead of across with the white, adding white, we're now adding just black as we go through. So that looks good. Change this last swatch to your purple. Something to note here is that because the purple is already, again, we talked about how even at maximum saturation it appeared a little dark. That means that we don't see the transition here to shades as dramatically as we might say with a yellow or some other colors. Okay, tones progressing to a lighter value. What we're going to do with this one is we're actually just going to go downwards. Yes, exactly. You're going to just kind of move down sort of at a diagonal. Now notice how this one, I can already tell that this is not part of your scale. This last swatch, it's a different hue because notice how different it looks. I mean, it's not just lighter, but it actually has kind of a different color undertone to it, and that's why. So you need to change that. It's really one of the, I would say one of the other, and a lot of what I'm saying here are just sort of general comments to everybody, is one of the other purposes of this exercise is to start fine-tuning your visual acuity to color, because we tend, at the more we work with color and like these subtle differences, the better we get at it. I have a friend who's, he's been a really lifelong painter. Like it works in a studio every day working with paints and mixing paints, and he can tell the difference between tiny little differences in color that I certainly can't, even though I figure I'm fairly good at color. But anyhow, so that's what we're trying to do here, is just to kind of fine-tune a little bit our acuity to color. This looks good too, so let's go from here, and now we're just yeah, exactly, you're taking that diagonal line and you're just choosing a diagonal line that goes all the way downwards, so that you're progressing to a darker value instead of a lighter value. And just change this one as well. And then, so tones maintaining a constant value. This may be going a bit light, but let's double check. So how can you double check that in Photoshop? Let's see. Hold on a second here. What you can do is you can actually go up to image, and I apologize, this is a little bit outside of the viewing window, but if you go to image and adjustments, or pardon me, modes, what you can do is you can change it to grayscale. So image mode grayscale, and we can actually look at, oh, see, that's actually really pretty good. So maybe just, there's different ways. Because I'm in software, I just use the easy way out. But you can also kind of, what we used to do before digital software is we would squint at the screen or at whatever you were looking at. And you can sort of see, when you squint, you can see the color value drop out a little bit, and you can sort of see it a little bit more clearly. But so you could take this guy down just a little bit darker, barely. So I'm going to go here just to make sure we're in the purple color. But just make it just a wee bit darker at the end, and you'd be in good shape. Okay, so I think you understood the principles really well here of all the different concepts, and all you need to do now is just fine-tune these a little bit more. Yeah, it's a beautiful color, isn't it? And yeah, so nice job here with your saturated color. That looks really great. So it looks like for you, now that we've covered the last swatch, so the reason why this is happening is because this is the color of the template. Right? This is what the template color was. It had an underlying color of red. So you just want to make sure all of your swatches, these end swatches, turn to your chosen color. You just make that change. And otherwise, I think this looks really good. I can tell that you're following along with the tints, which is great. Nice job. So you want to just, yeah, put that one in there. And for this one here, this looks pretty good too. You're going, so you want to just make sure that you really hug this line quite closely. It will start making a difference where you start actually mixing. You'll start noticing that these, what happens when you start mixing in a little gray instead of pure black or pure white for the tints or the shades, is what happens is you actually start to desaturate the color a little bit. Whereas what you can actually do is by just adding black or just adding white, you're actually not desaturating the color, you're keeping it pure, but just changing the value, right? So that's what we want to experiment with here, just making sure. So you want to, again, hug that line really closely all the way through. And yeah, that's really the main thing here, and then change your last swatch here. Sometimes too, when you get to these colors right in here, these swatches, sometimes what can happen is you get really, they become very sort of a solid black, even though you're making changes here in the space, like you're actually stepping downwards. But sometimes you get, so you want to kind of just look at, see if you can really make a nice, like I can really see the difference here between these swatches, these four in here, but I don't see as much difference here, and I don't see as much difference in here. So, see if you can maybe, when I do this exercise, I love to do this every once in a while. It takes me a few times to try to get the colors even, playing back and forth, so you might want to do that. Okay, this one, tones progressing to a lighter value. So just make sure when you start, yeah, maybe go a little further downwards in this first step. So you're pulling downwards a little further into the tones, because I can see, there you go, yeah, that looks good. Yeah, very nice. And I think these steps in here look really good. And just this last swatch to me looks like the one you want to just change here. And this one, tones progressing to a darker value, that looks good too. Notice too how, how much lighter, even though, again, we're at full saturation, everybody, notice how even when we moved a little bit towards the warmer color here, away from the violet before, how much lighter this particular hue is, just the natural properties of hue. So tones progressing, let's see, hold on, maybe I can put this up here. I'm just gonna reorganized everything here so I could get my color picker without moving it around. Yeah, so tones progressing to a darker value. That looks good, yeah. And yeah, so just change that last one. I think that's all you really need to do here. So for tones maintaining a constant value, this is the one I find kind of tricky myself. Um, so this one, I may keep experimenting with this one a little bit more. It looks like, so this one's staying the same, so you want to just play with that one a little bit more. So maybe just even it up a little bit. Let's see here. So for this one, you might make a little bit of a bigger step in that one to make a bit more of a difference, kind of bit more step of a step here. Just kind of play with that and even it out a little bit. But I think that you are, let's just test it out here in the, hold on, I need to close that out. The mode here. Yeah, look at that. See, that looks really awesome here in terms of your value. Um, so I think that you've, really ended really in a good spot here. So it's just a matter of evening your steps out. Okay, so yeah, great job. Nay, all right, so you're working with the green, nicely saturated, great, and it looks to me like your tints are looking really good here. So what I would say with the tints here is just again, make sure to change this last swatch to your green, and then maybe sort of spread out a little bit of the change right in here, closer in here, so that your steps, like from here to here, it looks quite like a large step, which actually is pretty, like when we get to this end here of the color picker, tiny little changes actually make a big difference, whereas here at the beginning you can actually make a fairly big jump and it doesn't look like much is happening. So just kind of see if you can spread that change out a little bit more and change that last swatch. I think that's all you need to do there. This looks really good too. Yeah. Nice job here. Notice here how in this swatch, actually it's starting to look quite dark, but we still see quite a lot of that green, don't we? It's interesting how you can actually go quite dark and still perceive the underlying color, whereas when we get here, it gets a little harder to see it. And this one, of course, you want to just make sure to change that. If you wanted to experiment, you could try to see if you could maybe incorporate a little bit more of a change in the step between these two. Even once you've changed this one, they'll both look pretty dark, like they'll look pretty black. So you could see if you could maybe, even out those steps a little bit more. Tones progressing to a lighter value. I think you could maybe even go lighter to really, kind of to dramatize going to, now because green is naturally a lighter color, even at maximum saturation, and maybe even go a little lighter, like up towards here, just a little bit more. I think this is, this is definitely going to a lighter value. Let's do our test here. And go to the grayscale. So yeah, so it's actually maybe even going a little darker. So I might, again, pick a lighter, just go a little lighter there. This one's going darker, which is great. And this one probably will, need to go a little lighter at the end. In fact, you could almost switch these two. Like this could become, well, actually, I'm sorry about that. But you could move this one down here. Not switch them, but this one move down here. And then this one here, just go a little lighter. Let's actually reverse and go in there. Okay, if that makes sense. So this one should go a little lighter. This one looks good going a little darker. I think that, I think just this last, let's just go in here to the color picker. I think just that last swatch you want to make sure to turn it from the red. Yeah, that looks good. Yeah, there's this last one here. And then this one, just constant value, just kind of tweak that one more like this one. Okay, good. All right. I personally find that these exercises, as I mentioned before, when I work on this exercise, it takes me a few times to get it evened out, because as you start, you may have to, you get to the end and you're like, oh yeah, there's some problems. And you have to kind of in a way start from the beginning to, to redo it. So don't worry if you need to do it a few times. I do think that's a pretty normal process here. You overcame some of your challenges. Were your challenges software based or just the concepts, or maybe a little bit of both? Um, yeah, in any case, I really think these exercises, if you were struggling a little bit with the software, I love these exercises because I think they actually, color theory really gives you a lot of practice in the software, just basic stuff like shapes, which I think is so awesome. Um, Anyhow, let's see here. So you've got uh, the violet color, great, nice. You've got looks like you're, yeah, good, transitioning to the tints. This looks very good here. Nice even steps. And just maybe this last one, I think. Otherwise, I think this looks really good. This one, same here. I think this looks pretty good here. You're going to the, oops, I'm going to the middle here. I might just maybe check this one here. Just fix that one. Some of these, now with the, in the purple, when we go into the shades, it's harder to make the steps look more, dramatic because there's less change in here. So I think you've done a good job here at letting that flow. And then this one here, tones progressing to a lighter value. Good, yeah, I think this is looking good. You're going downwards. And I think the only thing you'll need to do is changing is that one. Otherwise, I think that looks really good. Tones progressing to, I don't even think I don't need to check these with the software because I can already see that they're going darker. Yeah, that looks really good. So just check that one. And then this looks pretty good. Let me just change this to grayscale because this one's the harder one to evaluate, isn't it? But it looks pretty even to me, keeping a constant value. Let's just look here. Yeah, look at that. Amazing. All right, this looks good. I really think the only thing you're going to need to change here is your last swatch, but let me just go through here. Yeah, what I might do here is maybe start some of your, like make bigger steps at the beginning, a little bit bigger steps, so you get a little bit more of a change happening at the beginning, so that you spread out the steps a little bit more. Does that make sense? And then just make sure that you switch this last one. Okay? But yeah, that's it. Don't worry if you accidentally submitted more files. That's not a problem. I think the opposite is more of a problem. Sometimes the files don't get attached, and that's always, a good thing to check on. Let's see. Okay, so you have, starting with the red, great, nice and saturated. Everyone's doing such a good job with that. And yeah, this overall looks good. I can tell you're going on the tints here. Nice. I would just say in this last final step, again, here, between here and here in the color, I'm just looking at the color picker here. Seems like a little jump, but actually in color picker terms, for some reason, the color picker makes a really big jump there, when we get to the end. So if you can maybe like spread out that change here, distribute it into the rest of the scale a little bit more, so all of your steps, so like for example, here to here is the same as here to here, if that makes sense, because this seems a little bit of a big jump. So I might just spread that out. This looks really good here. And I would just, well, no, actually, that looks pretty good. Yeah, I think this one's fine. You don't need to make any changes. Tones progressing to a lighter value. I think that looks really, I might, with this one, maybe start going downwards a little bit more here, and maybe make a bit more of a jump, um, so that your changes, you can actually use the color. I like using the color picker here to look at my change. So like you can sort of see here, like the original color stays, and then wherever you pick next will show up there, so you can actually sort of decide, okay, is that enough of a big step? Okay, maybe I need a little bit more. So what I might do is just kind of work that a little bit more downwards and a little bit larger, but overall I think that looks good. The direction you're going in looks good in terms of keeping it nice and light. And this one, can you see here that actually the underline, I could tell that this was a little bit different, like a little bit cooler, and that's because it looks like maybe the hue shifted a little bit here. It's still still in a warm color, which is good, but you want to keep the hue the same as the rest of it, like the hue should stay constant. And so if you look at the here's a way I like to use the software to help me understand hue. So there's a little box in here, right here, below the colors called hue. And right now, so let's go to your first hue. The color number is 0 for hue here. And so you can actually manually change it as you work. So that's your 0 color. Every swatch should stay 0. Now some of these are switching a little bit. You can see that that one was 1 and 359. Sometimes like one number is okay. It's not going to make a big difference. But sometimes when you get too far, you can actually see it really jumped here too. You can actually look at it in that little slider and see the jump. And you can actually change it if you go in here and type in 0 as you apply your color. You can return it back to the color you want to, if that makes sense. And okay, let's go to this one here. That looks good. Going all the way down. And this one changed as well. So you want to just tweak that one as well, that color. And it's good too to kind of keep, when you work with the tones progressing to a darker value, you can kind of try to keep a straightish line going as you move your down your color picker. You can kind of pick a line. It's going to always be a diagonal line because you're moving into the tones. So kind of just keep moving on a straight line as you go down. That way you'll have the best chance of keeping it even, if that makes sense. So you're kind of, well, you know, yeah, it's actually, the curve is actually, I think it's still pretty smooth. So maybe maybe just let's change this last one. So tones maintaining a constant value, I think that looks pretty good. Might be getting a bit lighter at the end. Let's just check that, double check it. Well, actually no, it looks really great. So that one, yeah, so that looks really good. Maybe just switch this last one again. Yeah, I don't know why it's going magenta. It's usually always on the red, so you might just want to double check that one. Okay, just sort of minor tweaks. Everybody really pretty much has got just very small little tweaks here. Well, I'm glad you didn't give up, Ebony. Photoshop can be, they all are a little bit tweaky, but if you have Illustrator, you may want to try Illustrator for the assignments in this class. If you know more about Photoshop, you might just want to stick with Photoshop if that is already a software you're familiar with. But if you're at the same place with Photoshop and Illustrator, maybe you don't know a lot about either, Illustrator can be a lot easier for this class just because it's designed to work with like solid color like this, like vectors, you know, so you may want to give that a try. It's up to you. You know, we've got tutorials for both of them, so Photoshop is also, you know, a good choice. But anyhow, I thought I'd mention that. Okay, so tints. So good, you've got the cooler color and purple, and it's at maximum saturation, which is great. Now it looks to me like what happened here, you see how there's a couple things happening here. One is that you're actually moving into the tone area, and we do always want to stick at the top, like we talked about before, right? Like you can actually, the circle here, you can actually put the circle like there, and you can also pull it even higher. That's where you want it to be, as high as it can be pulled, so it stays a tint. And the other thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you stay with your original color. So you want to do the same thing that we talked about with Chris, is to make sure that your hue is the same. So it looks like you went to kind of a purpley color away from the magenta. So you want to like take a look at your hue here, 278, and keep it at 278 for all of your choices. Okay, for all of your entire table of swatches. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is just make sure that you move across this line too. That's really the most important thing, is to stay on the tints. Okay, and you want to change your last swatch. So for shades, that looks pretty good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, you're going along that line. That's exactly what you want to be doing. is going along, right along that black line. So it looks good. Yeah, so just change this last swatch. You might want to just, right here, it looks like the swatch, can you see how it's staying the same? That's the same color. So you want to just move gradually along this line, making sure that each one you're stepping in an equal amount. Now, when I say equal, the color picker, it's not quite equal in terms of the changes. You actually have to visually look at, like if you measured it down perfectly in the color picker, like with equal amounts, it doesn't actually translate into even steps in terms of the colors themselves. You actually have to kind of eyeball it and go, okay, that looks like an even step as you go down. So I would just double check that one. And then tones progressing to a lighter value. Yeah, that looks good. Yeah, so you're going along a diagonal line. Yep. Nice. I think that looks good. Just that last one. That looks good. And tones progressing to a darker value. So for this one, what I would do is make sure that you go in. So it looks like you're using shades here again. Okay, so you want to make sure you're going into the tones, and it's going to look a little. So the shades here, what makes them different from the tones getting darker? It's that these are clearer colors because they're still saturated, whereas tones progressing to a darker value will kind of gray out, you know, so they won't look so clean in terms of the colors. So like for example, we'll start up here again, and then what we want to do is pick a diagonal line somewhere. It actually can be, it really can almost be anywhere through here, because as long as you're going darker, then you'll be in good shape. So you can just sort of see, you can see the colors changing here, so you can sort of move along here. And anything in here is going to be, now we get very quickly to the dark shades in here. So you can start, I would start and just kind of take smaller steps. Just, you want to just kind of look at your, you know, your changes here and kind of move them along. But anyhow, so that's what you want to do here, is you want to just make sure that you're staying in the tones rather than the shades. And tones maintaining a constant value. Yeah, good. You're in the tones here. That's great. You just want to change this last one. Let's just kind of, looks like, now I don't trust myself anymore because I was wrong the last time, so let's just double check here in the software. And yeah, maybe a bit darker at the end. Just so by darker, you just kind of go back into your, let's just go here. So you would just take, and when you go a little darker, you just kind of go maybe just even a hair darker and see if that, you know, changing that line makes it a little more you're very close, you know, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. But if you wanted to kind of experiment a little bit more with that one, that's what I would do. Okay, all right, everybody, nice job to start out with, and I'll see you in the next critique, which will be on Monday.